Hello friends and welcome to another episode of Piano TV. I am Allysia, your host, and today we are going to be talking about boogie-woogie music, which is a branch off of the old jazz and blues piano music tree. We actually mentioned this genre really briefly in a video we did a while ago called Something About American Music History, I'll link it, but we talked about like a whole bunch of different American-based music genres, and boogie-woogie is one of them. And one of the cool things about boogie-woogie is that it's specifically piano-focused, whereas a lot of these other genres like blues and stuff use other instruments like guitars. Boogie-woogie is all about the piano. So it's a really great genre if you're wanting to get into some upbeat, jazzier styles. It's much more upbeat than traditional blues. It's meant for dancing, and yeah, it's just overall a really fun style. What we're going to be talking about today is the evolution of the genre, so we're going to talk a little bit of history, but I also want to share with you the 12 main bass lines, because the bass lines of boogie-woogie basically define it as a genre. So we're going to go through those bass lines on the piano. I'll show you how to play them. I'll show you what the notes are, and we'll talk a little bit of context and all that stuff. One thing I've also done is I've created a Spotify playlist which you can find the link for below. And if you want an hour of boogie-woogie music to listen to get you coordinated, to get you in the zone with the genre, then check that out. Anyway, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start with the question, where did the term boogie-woogie come from? There are three African words that probably contributed to the term boogie-woogie. We have boog and booga, which both mean to beat a drum. And then we have the word boogie, meaning to dance. These terms are consistent with the strong beat and wild dancing common to boogie-woogie music. The term boogie in sheet music started appearing around the turn of the 20th century, such as that syncopated Boogie Boo from 1913. But this, and other works with boogie in the title around this time, didn't yet represent what we now know as boogie-woogie. A track called Weary Blues, both the version from 1915 and from 1919, are the first recordings known to use the standard boogie-woogie bass lines. The first time the actual spelling of boogie-woogie was used was in 1928 with Pinetop's Boogie-Woogie, which also conveniently contained dance instructions in the lyrics. The origin of boogie-woogie seems to be in Texas in the late 1800s. It was also referred to earlier on, before it was boogie-woogie, as something called a fast western. This Texas style of jazz and blues was differentiated from the New Orleans type of jazz and blues, which is a little bit slower, so much so that musicians in the know would be able to tell what region a player was from simply by hearing the way they play the piano. Specific boogie-woogie style bass lines are named after different locations where they originated. For example, the Marshall bass line, the most primitive version of the boogie-woogie pattern, originated in Marshall, Texas. It's just a simple 4 beats to the bar figure. Now, we are going to come back around to this one and other bass lines and go through them in full, but I just wanted to introduce the idea to you first. In 2010, Marshall, Texas enacted an official declaration for being the birthplace of boogie-woogie music, and the city's now investing in further research as well as making that a tourist attraction. And the Marshall, as we just mentioned, is the first most primitive bass line of boogie-woogie, and again, we will get to those shortly. So boogies were sometimes called house rent parties, and the way it went is someone who wanted to be able to pay their rent would invite a bunch of people over, have a boogie-woogie musician cook up some tasty southern fare, and then charge a fee at the door, and that entrance fee would help them pay for their rent. And the idea was, you go to your friend's house, help him pay for the rent, and then he'll come to your house and help you pay for the rent, and then everyone has a party. Some of the most famous boogie-woogie musicians include Meade Lux Lewis, Jimmy Yancey, and Albert Ammons, and we're going to kind of talk about them a little bit later. We'll mention their names anyway. But there's also Cripple Clarence Lofton and Sugar Chili Robinson. The first wave of boogie-woogie players was influenced by ragtime music, and ragtime is another piano-based sort of bluesy, jazzy genre, which we've already talked about on this channel, so check out that video if you want more information. But then the second wave of boogie-woogie musicians, who were born a little bit later, were more influenced by blues music. One of the earliest boogie-woogie hits, as I mentioned earlier, was Pinetop's Boogie-Woogie by Pinetop Smith, which was released in 1929. Now, since this song became a huge hit, it helped establish the connection between the term boogie-woogie and the style of music. One of the first solo piano records of boogie-woogie was published in 1924 by Jimmy Blythe. The album is called Chicago Stomps. In the late 1930s, you could see piano performances of boogie-woogie music at fancy places like Carnegie Hall. The performers there included Big Toe Turner, Pete Johnson, and Meade Lux Lewis. Now, these were high-class performances, and they would all often play piano duets or trios, which would create a really nice, rich, textured sound. And then around 1940, we hit the swing era, which absorbed some of the boogie-woogie styles. We had Tommy Dorsey's band and their recording of a cover of Pine Top's Boogie-Woogie, which became a hit in the mid-40s. In fact, it was such a big hit that it was swing music's second biggest hit of all time, the first being Glenn Miller's In the Mood. Other boogie-woogie songs coming into popularity around this time included Boo Woo and Woo Woo by Harry James, Pete Johnson, and Albert Ammons. The Will Bradley Orchestra wrote boogie-woogie music as well, including Beat Me Daddy 8 to the Bar and Down the Road a Piece. Pretty much every big band group around this time had a boogie-woogie song or two in their toolbox in the 1940s. We're going to go through the main bass lines of boogie-woogie now, and they're each defined by their geographical origins. Before we do that, I do want to take you through 12-bar blues, since 12-bar blues is used in boogie-woogie patterns and stuff like that. So it'll give everything a little bit of context for you. Boogie-woogie patterns are based on 12-bar blues. So a standard 12-bar blues pattern looks like this. You have the tonic chord 4 times, the subdominant 2 times, then back to the tonic 2 more times, then we go to the 5, then to the 4, and then back to the tonic. The Roman numerals here are just representing chords. So for example, if you're in the key of C, the 1 chord, the tonic chord, is C. The subdominant, which is the Roman numeral for 4, would be F, since C, D, E, F. F is 4 notes up from C. And then the 5 chord, the Roman numeral V, would be a G, since G is 5 notes up from C. We've talked about, I don't want to spend too much time talking about this today, and we have talked about that a lot on the channel, but anyway, that's your basic 12-bar blues pattern, which in the key of C would be what you see on the screen. But of course, it's important to note that this 12-bar blues pattern wasn't necessarily followed to the letter by musicians. Like some musicians would, sometimes you see like 14-bar blues or 11-bar blues. They would play around with it, but this was the basic premise of the pattern. Now we're going to look at some of the boogie-woogie bass lines. There are 12 that we're going to specifically be looking at today. We're going to start with the Marshall, since we already mentioned it. And since Marshall, Texas is considered the birthplace of boogie-woogie, it makes sense that this is our starting point. It's the simplest boogie-woogie pattern with 4 to a bar, meaning there are 4 left-hand beats in each bar. It follows a walking pattern of 1, 3, 4, 5, and we're doing it in 12-bar blues. So there's 2 on 4 and then 2 on tonic. Basically, you just plunk your hands in a 5-finger position. It gets to work. So you start with C position, move to F position, back to C, and then we have G, F, C. So it's based on that key's pentascale. So for example, F pentascale is F, G, A, B, C, B flat, A, G, F. So when we're playing the 1, 3, 4, 5 pattern, you're going to play the 1, 3, 4, and 5 of F scale. And so on. Then we had the Jefferson, slightly more complex than the Marshall, which originated in Jefferson, Texas. From there, the boogie-woogie patterns spread out and became increasingly more complex, which you're going to be seeing. This one is still easy in that it's a 4 to a bar pattern, but it involves a little more movement in the hand, extending the position from a standard 5-finger position up to, we're going to be stretching a full 6. But again, it's pretty straightforward. 1, 5, 6, 5 is your pattern. 1, 5, 6, 5. And then we move to F position. I'm doing all these patterns in the key of C for ease. And then we have G, F, C. Next we have the Hoxie bass line. This is a variation on the Marshall and would lead to Texas and Pacific bass line, which is also known as the Cows. I'm not entirely sure why, but we'll look at that one too. And the Texas and Pacific bass line is one of the most famous boogie-woogie figures. So this was kind of like the origin of that one. Still 4 to a bar, our pattern with the Hoxie is 1, 3, 5, 6. 1, 3, 5, 6. It's basically a chord plus the 6th note. A chord plus the 6th note. So we have 3, 4, and then F, 1, 3, 5, 6, and then 1, 3, 5, 6, 1, 3, 5, 6, G, F, C. So that's all going to be when you put that together. I was playing it quite fast, but just to kind of illustrate it. The Texas and Pacific bass line, Boogie-Woogie's most well-known figure, was developed by piano players performing at the boarding house for workers who were building the Texas and Pacific Bridge, hence the name. This is where we get the 8 to a bar rhythm. It's a walking scale-like pattern where we go 1, 3, 5, 6, lowered 7, 6, 5, 3. So we go 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, 6, transitional one, so the one linking to the next chord on C, we go up to the 8, and that's just like a instead of going to the 7, we just go to the 8. So I'll show you. 1, 2, 3, 4, transition, and then oh, whoops, I missed that bottom note. But then F, 2, back to C, transitional, and then we go to G, F, back to C. And then transitional, and then you just would keep on going forever. Next up is the Texarkana and Northern Bassline, which was invented by people who were working on the Kansas City Southern Railroad. So this next one is a swinging 8 to a bar pattern. It is catchy, but it's quite a bit more complex to play. So you notice it's going an octave, so 1, 8, then lowered 3, 3, 5. And then we go 1, 6, 5 to transition to the next one. The F one is the exact same pattern. And then we go back to C. Sorry, that was not a C. And then we keep going. Our G pattern again is the same, where we're going the octave and then 3, 3, 5. 3, lower 3, then regular 3, octave, octave, and then lower 3 and regular 3, and so on. So that's a really fun one. The Swamp Poodle bassline, named after Texarkana's red light district, is basically just a broken octave doubling of the Texas and Pacific bassline. It's also probably the most well-known boogie-woogie pattern of all time. Again, being a variation of the Texas and Pacific, which is also a super popular bassline, makes sense. Our Texas and Pacific bassline looked like this. We went 1, 3, 5, 6, flat 7, 6, 5, 3. The Swamp Poodle is identical, but now we're just inserting an octave in between. So these are rocking octaves. So 1, 3, 4, sorry, 1, 3, 5, 6, 7. And the fact that we're doing octaves now does make it quite a bit trickier to play, but it sounds really good. And then we go to the F, back to C, and so on, and then our G. And then we go through our blues pattern. Another boogie-woogie figure is the Black Diamond bassline, named after the community in which it originated, like all these other ones. But not to be confused with Challenging Ski Hills, although I guess this pattern definitely has its own challenges. I wouldn't say it's like the hardest boogie-woogie pattern, but it ain't easy. Okay, so the pattern for this one, alternating with like a top octave note, is 1, 3, 4, sharp 4, 5. So we go. So, and then we have a flat 3 on the way down. So we 1, 3, 4, 4, 5, 4, 4, flat 3, 1. And then we're just alternating with a top octave note. And doesn't it sound really cool? I really like this one. It does change a little bit on the 9th and 10th bar because these are our really short bars. They're not 2 bars long. So we go 1, 3, 4, sharp 5. So we're going 4, 5, 1. The Shreveport bassline from Shreveport, Louisiana, is from the red light district where famous musician Leadbelly grew up. Apparently, according to legend, he heard boogie-woogie music being played on a piano down the street from where he grew up. Now, this is our first bassline that mixes up quarter notes and eighth notes, and in some ways, that actually makes it more difficult to play. Eighth notes all in a row might be faster, but since they're consistent and steady, it tends to be a little easier to play than rhythms like this one that's mixed. So we're going 1, 8, 3, 5, 3, 5, 1, 8, 3, 5, 3. Oh, so this one's like a tongue twister, but like a finger twister. 1, 8, 3, 5, 3, 5, 1, 8, 3, 5. And then F, 1, 8, 3, 5, 3, 5, 1. The G. There are a couple other boogie boogie-woogie bass lines that take a different shape and form, as you're going to see here. So the first is the Tyler tap bass line, which is full of harmonic intervals, just like the Big Sandy bass line. Basically what that means is that their notes played at the same time. So instead of a single note figure, we now have a dual note figure. So the pattern for the Tyler tap is fifth, so 1 and 5, 1 and 5, alternating with the third and the sixth note. So 1 5, 1 5. Which sound, it has like kind of an off sound, which I think is really cool. And then the inner notes 3, flat 3, and regular 3. And then we move to the F, C, and G. Sandy is just the easier version of that. So we're just alternating the two intervals, 1 and 5, 1 and 5, 3 and 6. To F. I cut that one in half. And then G. So we're just alternating intervals of fifths and fourths. Then we have a couple simpler single note bass lines, the Greenwood bass line and the Wascom bass line. And here's the Wascom one too. This one's a little bit simpler with its rhythm, but we're going to go to the keyboard and take a look at those. So this one I think is more challenging than it looks, because on the surface it's really easy. It's just a C chord, a C, E, and a G. But as with the Shreveport, the non-steady rhythm here can make this one really hard, especially because the beat is syncopated. So we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. One note in the middle is played on the half beat where we go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, but it's such a great beat. And our final pattern, one of the easiest to play. It's just simply a major chord pattern, kind of like the previous one, but there's no syncopation here like in the Greenwood. So we're just going 1 5 3, 1 2 5 3, 1 2 5 3, 1 5 3, 1 5 3. Popular boogie-woogie hit includes Cow Cow Boogie by Johnny Barfield. This is a blend of standard boogie-woogie with like the Western cowboy music style, and this would lead to the genre hillbilly boogie in the mid-1940s. So another famous song from this period would be Freight Train Boogie by the Delmore Brothers. This song would actually help the genre lean into rockabilly, not rockability. Hillbilly boogie lasted about a decade long. We had Guitar Boogie and Banjo Boogie by Arthur Smith, which were also notable boogie-woogies in this vein. But the boogie beat would continue to surface in country music throughout the decades, and it would even be like a throwback for musicians down the road. So you had the Charlie Daniels Band with their song Boogie-Woogie Fiddle Country Blues, released in 1988. And then, of course, you have the very famous Brooks and Dunn song Boot Scootin' Boogie in 1991. Boogie-Woogie made its way to Chicago as well. Otis Spann and Pinetop Perkins, who were two legendary blues pianists, were both heavily influenced by Pinetop Smith. Okay, so how long did Boogie-Woogie last as a genre? Well, it lasted about 1.5 decades, from the mid to late 30s to the early 1950s. From there, it evolved into jump blues, and then jump blues eventually evolved into rock and roll. Aside from country artists, people in a lot of genres have released boogie-woogie music, not just in the hillbilly boogie vein, but in others as well, like since the 50s. Big Joe Duskin's 1979 album, Cincinnati Stomp, features the genre, for example. Christina Aguilera even has a boogie-woogie song. It's called Candyman, and it's based on the Big Tunes hit Boogie-Woogie Bugle Boy. Boogie-woogie can be heard in classical music as well. We have Morton Gould's Boogie-Woogie Etude. We also have Conlaw Nancarrow's early works, which were inspired by the genre. And Pavel Ramel mixed it up with a waltz in Johansson's Boogie-Woogie Valse. Alright, so let's wrap up this video with a discussion on the qualities and characteristics of boogie-woogie music. As we've talked about already in depth, it is a piano-based genre that is more or less defined by its bass lines. We have the bass lines that we went through, and those bass lines are repeated over and over in the left hand on the piano, and then the right hand riffs over top of that. And that's the main characteristic of Boogie-Woogie right there. It tended to be working class music, born in communities of workers such as lumber yards, railroad workers, and so on, or as we talked about, for urban rent parties. Boogie-Woogie emphasizes rhythm over melody, simplicity over complexity, and patterns over chords. It tended to be wild and unpolished, and oftentimes you would hear boogie-woogie music performed on like old, out-of-tune pianos, and that was just like, that added to the charm of it. Basically, it was party music. Most boogie-woogie is 8 to the bar, which means that there's 8 eighth beats in every bar of music, and that's kind of the rhythmic standard. Although earlier boogie-woogie is 4 to the bar, like we talked about, and that's a little bit simpler to play too. Melodies tend to use the blues scale with some added chromaticism. There's a lot of chromaticism in boogie-woogie, and that just adds a little bit of interest. This is an African-American-led genre, so the music draws on the tradition of spirituals and the powerful rhythms of African music. And unlike ragtime, this is one difference. It's meant to be played with like a swing eighth note instead of playing with a straight beat with your eighth notes. If this is your quarter beat, da 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 da. That's a straight beat, but a swing beat, da 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 da, has a kind of like lilt to it. It kind of flows like that. I'm starting to get a little abstract. I'm doing the wave with my hand. And that is all for today's video on Boogie-Woogie. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe you learned something. And be sure to check out the Spotify playlist I made for it. Like I said, it's really short. It's about an hour long. It covers pretty much everything that we talked about in today's video, like all of the big names and big compositions. So yeah, it's a really easy listen, 22 songs. You can learn a little bit of new music and maybe dance around your living room a little bit, which is what me and Jane were doing when we were listening through this playlist. If you want, you can check out the blog post associated with this video. As with every video on pianoTV, there's a blog post that goes along it. So if you're more into like reading as opposed to watching videos, or you want it for reference, I just want to let you know it's there. Without further ado, subscribe if you haven't already. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one. From there, it kind of evolved into jump rock, and then jump rock kind of evolved into rock and roll. Jump blues, whoops.